Hello, good afternoon, guys. So I'm Crystal. I work at Gojek for the past 3 years. I've been running the business intelligence team and now the growth team, where we run experiments on average once a day. So a little bit about me. I've been at Gojek for 3 years, and it wasn't always as big as it is today. So I was doing a lot of things on internal portals. I was HR. I was investor relations. So I got to play many different roles. And in that time, I've been able to look at data across our universe of products and build the data warehouse with our team. And so what is Gojek, right? We don't actually operate in Singapore, but we actually are able to provide all of these services in Indonesia. And so our app is a platform from which you can order transportation, food delivery, you can send packages, you can buy movie tickets. And so we even have a mobile wallet. But we weren't always this big. We actually started out as just a motorcycle taxi transport app. And so Nadeem, our CEO, started with some small data points. He realized that the life of an GO-JEK, a motorcycle taxi, is not very productive. And the userability is very poor. People would have to haggle for prices. They would have to wait under a hot tree on a side of a street trying to get a motorcycle taxi to drive them wherever they needed. And so by creating a mobile app, we can allow the driver's productivity to go across all of these different products. The same driver that takes you to work can also drop off your groceries and can deliver your food all in the same day. And so today we are actually the largest food delivery startup outside of China. And statistically speaking, about 1 in 3 Jakartans have actually used our product at some point in their lives. And our mobile wallet is one of the largest digital wallets in Indonesia. And so we've solved a lot of these problems and identified a lot of new products to build on top of this. And we achieved this by lots of hacky experimentation, a lot of product ideation, and we've seen our growth kind of be unpredictable, really. And that's how you know that the products that you're experimenting with are good things to experiment on. Not all of them are going to be sustainable, but a couple of them will kind of accelerate your growth like crazy. So today I'm going to talk about 5 different ways, I guess, in the timeline of experimentation that we use at Gojek. First one being, start with the goals. So it might be kind of antithetical to think about experimentation and my goals. But the fact of the matter is, when we started running experiments at Gojek, it started to become easy to ask about a feature, whether or not we should develop it, and then someone would just say, oh yeah, let's just run an experiment. Just build the feature, we'll run an experiment, go ahead. Then we'll let the data tell us about whether or not we should launch this feature. And that sounds like a great idea, but reality is everyone has lots of ideas, and I only have 10 developers. I cannot build every single feature idea that everyone thinks of. And so please start with OKRs, right? If your objectives and key results are something like increase the average monthly transactions per user, then that kind of narrows down the different types of features you want to experiment on. So start with the goal. And when you start with the goal, you start thinking about what is preventing you from reaching that goal. Hopefully, your management team is strategic enough to come up with a strategic goal for you. But this problem-solving exercise is something that the growth team does every quarter. Given this goal, we ask ourselves, given this objective, what is a key result that I am expecting out of that objective? If I need more monthly transactions, then I need the average weekly transactions to increase as well. And given that key result, what is currently preventing me from actually reaching the goal of that key result? We start with the 5 whys. And the 5 whys, combined with other techniques like being MISI, mutually exclusive and collectively exhaustive, looking at first principles. These types of things help in trying to identify what is the root cause of my problem so that I can identify features and ideas that may solve these problems for me. So what is preventing me from getting more average weekly transactions? Well, ask the room of analysts, and maybe someone says, well, most of our new weekly users drop off, or they only do one transaction in the first week. Okay, well, why? And maybe they say, okay, well, let's send a survey, and they find out, 80% of these users, oh, I only wanted to use your food delivery app once, and I didn't need it anymore. And so then you can continue to ask, why? And maybe they find out that, oh, they didn't actually know that, your app has more than food delivery. Okay, well, that's a good problem, but why? And maybe you find out that actually it's because we don't have a proper onboarding service, right? The real reason we don't have a lot more frequency of transactions is because users don't even know that they can transact on your app. And so doing this 5 whys exercise, there aren't actually 5 whys because it wouldn't fit on the page, but doing this exercise as many times as it needs to get to root cause will actually help you identify what features should you be thinking about that you want to be experimenting on. Because it's a lot better to run 3 very problem-solving experiments than it is to run 10 random experiments that don't do very much at all. And so now that will lead us into the ideation part, right? Why is it so important that we structure the ideas to come from the goals themselves? So thought exercise really quickly. Everyone, please imagine everything white in the world right now. And now, how about imagine everything that is white that is currently in your fridge? Do you think of a lot more concrete items? Do you have a better sense of the items that you can list down? That's because you are being structured to think within that realm of influence that you have, something that is more concrete, similar to how we define the objectives and the goals and the problems that prevent us from reaching those goals. This actually helps us ideate and create a better backlog of experiment and product ideas. Previous to this, we were actually getting ideas that came from nowhere, or people were just pulling things from the backlog in any order, actually in the order of easiest to execute. And that doesn't lead to very good product features. And so when we want to run this ideation process, once we determine what we want to solve for, we have a very cohesive team, a developer, an analyst, UI, UX. We have an analyst, a product person. And why do we have this structure of people ideating when the developer could be developing or the UI, UX person could be designing? And that's really because it is going to cut down the process of doing impact analysis and technical feasibility analysis. Because instead of the product person spending all day detailing out a spec of something that is not technically feasible to do, the developer can very quickly say, hey, actually, we can't run that feature, but I do know this API that exists that can do a very similar thing. And so why don't we look at an idea around this instead? So involving all of these different parties also makes your feature much more user-centric, because all of these people collectively will care about the user and how each member of the team is contributing to making a better app experience for the user. It helps them to identify the ideas that are also within their control, rather than outside of their influence or impact. By having the team come together and prioritize and ideate together in something like an iteration planning meeting, we've actually ended up with storyboards like this, where we end up detailing out ideas that were organized and spec'd out with the product team and the development team together. So let's say that you found the perfect idea Everyone prioritized it from the developer to the product person. How do we start? So, of course, we need the minimum viable product. MVP does not die with the startup. A lot of people consider the MVP in experimentation and feature development as the minimum viable product. But at Gojek, it's a little bit more like the minimum viable prototype, because it doesn't need to full-fledged work if you have no idea what the impact of that feature will be. And so we do very hacky things to try to experiment with new features without investing a lot of resources into it. So for example, I could not share the whole WhatsApp group, so I just took a screenshot of this. But we were once selling subscription vouchers through drivers on WhatsApp. That was experimenting with subscription voucher pricing models. That's an experiment. We've done experiments where we thought that creating a weather station might help us get better data for surge pricing. And so we bought a Raspberry Pi and we set it up on a roof and tried to see if that data might actually help. Right? So find the easiest way possible to get the experience of what you are trying to build critically there for your users without spending as many resources as possible on it. And so let's say that we've identified that great prototype, we've spec'd it out, and we built it quickly. We try to do 2 weeks release cycles. And so we release it to the wild, right? So feature launch date, everything looks amazing. Our feature obviously worked, improved our product, bookings went up. And so what's wrong with this graph, though, is the lack of segmentation. If you do not have a counterfactual to understand what the real quantifiable impact of your product feature is, you will never be able to convince anyone that your actual product did something for the company. So we're always very cognizant to launch with control groups and experiment groups. Control groups get the status quo, and both groups need to be exactly the same user base. They need to be a statistically significant sample size, and they need to have the same, what is the word? They need to have the same metrics so that they are not wildly disproportionate. And so all of this comes in with the design of the product experiment. This is actually the hardest part. It's much harder than building the prototype, because if you get it wrong, you have to repeat the process, and time is very expensive in a startup. And so I'll do this through these last two through an example that we did last year. We wanted to experiment with acceptance rates. So we had a problem statement. Our drivers are crucial for accepting orders. If they don't accept an order, customers cancel or they don't get a driver to complete their booking. And given that this is a huge problem, and we know that accepting orders is a core root cause problem, we wanted to run an experiment. And so when we write an experiment design, there are 3 key things we have in the process, right? The first one is the null hypothesis. What do you think will actually happen given your new feature or experiment? The second one is on the metrics that matter. You need to define these up front, because otherwise any product owner will just find the one metric that improved after their experiment and say it was a success. And so identify what problem you're really solving. Here, it would be something like acceptance rate. And then the third is endogeneity. What is that? Well, it's about understanding cause and effect and multivariate conditions. Are you misattributing the impact of your experiment if you haven't controlled for all the variables? So in our example, we wanted to send an SMS, and we wanted to do it using social pressure. So social pressure was one of those variables that we intended to test with. And given that we wanted to use social pressure, we identified the medium of the experiment feature, which would be an automated service that would send drivers a message when their acceptance rates were very low. So how do we control for the null hypothesis, for the endogeneity for cause and effect, we had to really disentangle causality and understand what we were testing. In this feature, we were going to be testing the copy of an SMS, but what about the SMS itself? So when we finally did the end design, we came up with 3 types of copy. One of these is not like the other. And why is that? Because we wanted to test if social pressure itself versus the act of getting an SMS were going to be 2 different features that we should be identifying. Right? What is the effect of sending an SMS versus what is the effect of sending an SMS with social pressure? Were we going to definitely be able to say that sending an SMS with social pressure increases acceptance rates? Or does the act of sending an SMS itself already increase acceptance rates? And so we tested these 3 versions. Once we tested those 3 versions and we got our results, we didn't stop at the success of the SMS, right? Because we could have just stopped here. We said, oh wow, we sent 1 SMS. This is the first SMS, the one that said you were in the bottom 20%. And we saw that drivers on average increased by some 3 to 5% in acceptance rates. And it was consistently higher for the next few weeks. And so then comes the iteration process. How do you know that this isn't just a one-off, that for whatever reason, maybe your control groups weren't as random as you thought they were? And so we ran it a couple of times, and we ran them on specific user segments after doing the post-analysis research. So we looked at the metrics again at the end of 3 iterations, and we came up with some interesting data points, right? Obviously, we had to look at acceptance rates, and they were better. But what else could we look at that might help us understand what type of users does this feature really affect? What type of impact does it really have? So when we looked at average driver assignment time, we realized that, hey, not only does it increase acceptance rates, but it increases the speed at which these drivers accept as well. Next, we looked at churn. For some reason, all of the drivers who got an SMS did not churn as quickly as the rest of their cohort. And it didn't even matter what type of SMS they got. As long as we engaged with them, they stayed on the platform for a longer period of time. That's a new feature experiment idea. And then we looked at driver seniority. And this was very interesting to us because we found out that of the best drivers who improved, or the best drivers who showed the most impact from this experiment, were actually drivers who signed up in the past 40 days. And so now you have a full-fledged report and a better feature that you can develop for a very specific set of users for the most impact. So what we realized was sending these drivers behavioral nudges, especially if they're brand new drivers, will positively shape their habits for almost 3 months. That is actually the impact and the power of designing an experiment well and refining the results for the exact type of user base that it can impact. Thank you.